With so many cards being in Clash Royale and frequent balance changes, some cards are bound to be stronger than others. And the thing is, it often seems subjective, since a lot of people may think that a specific card is overpowered and in need of a nerf, simply because of level differences or repetitiveness. And since I already talked about the strongest evolutions, I wanted to look at some of the strongest versions of Clash Royale cards, in order to find out what is the most broken card throughout Clash Royale's existence without considering evolutions. The October/November 2022 Monk. The Monk was released alongside the Phoenix, and both of these cards were conveniently some of the most overpowered additions to Clash Royale. The Monk basically made the Knight irrelevant during the October and November 2022 season, since for only 1 elixir more, you got a card with around 20% more health and 54% more DPS, including the combo attack, while having a faster attack speed, which meant that it was better at countering Swarm as well as being deadly on attack. On top of that, his combo attack, which was every third hit, would do 3 times the damage, as well as almost a 2-tile pushback. So this made defenses with the Monk amazing, since he could shut down tanks. And being a champion, he also allowed for the 3-card cycle, meaning that you could cycle the broken October 2022 Phoenix even faster. So already, the Monk was running circles around the Knight, which previously up to this point was a jack-of-all-trades card. But then you get to his ability. For only 1 elixir, the Monk could not only deflect any projectile attack, but he could also deflect spells as well as reduce damage onto him by 80%, meaning he could basically delay an opponent's attack or get chip damage on the tower. At his peak, the Monk recorded a 50% usage rate in Grand Challenges, and you would see him in all sorts of decks. And this Grand Challenge usage doesn't even paint the entire picture, since the Monk was used in 9 of the top 10 finishes in November 2022, and this was after a nerf to the Monk's ability cooldown, showing truly how OP this card really was in its original launch state. The October 2019 Witch. I've already talked about the October 2019 meta in my videos before, where the meta was overrun by at least 5 different cards, all in arguably their most overpowered state throughout their entire existence in Clash Royale. But nothing in this meta held a candle to how OP the October 2019 Witch was at this time. Clash Royale attempted to rework the Witch by making it more of a musketeer, by reducing her splash radius and increasing her damage by 220%, alongside a bunch of other reworks to her skeleton spawning. The issue with this is that it kind of defeated the purpose of the Witch, since she was meant to deal lower damage as a compromise for her unique skeleton spawning ability and splash damage. And even if we don't address this rework at face value, this change was basically like adding a new card into Clash Royale at that point, so it was gonna take a while to get used to the new Witch. However, this high damage output made the Witch way too strong, since she became a musketeer that could spawn skeletons forever and deal splash damage, albeit within a smaller radius. And since the Witch already synergized well in beatdown decks, this allowed her to complement the October 2019 Elixir Golem well, resulting in the madness that was the meta in October 2019. But it wasn't just in Elixir Golem decks where the Witch was popular in. Being so versatile meant that the Witch was being used in not just beatdown decks, but also Mega Knight bait, graveyard control, and even in minor Warbreakers decks. In top 200 ladder, the Witch recorded a 43% usage rate, and the popularity of the Witch and the Night Witch actually inflated the usage rate of cards like the Mega Knight and the Bomb Tower, showing how obnoxious she really was. The October 2024 Goblinstein. The Goblinstein is probably one of the only cards on this list that seems balanced at first glance, but is actually insanely broken. When it was announced, a lot of people thought it was a little underwhelming, and it kind of did seem that way, since it was like a buffed Ice Golem combined with basically half an Electro Wizard with a chain link ability. Not sure if that's the best representation of this card, but I don't think people would have expected that the Doctor would be able to survive a poison spell, or even a P.E.K.K.A hit. This wasn't the only thing that made it broken though. The chain link ability, which was basically a straight line that connected the Doctor to the monster, where any troop or building within 2 tiles of it would take splash damage for 5 seconds, was insanely strong. It did 214 damage per second at level 11, which means over the 5-second period it would deal almost 1100 damage to any troop near the link, or 350 damage to the tower if the monster connected to the tower for only 2 elixir. Considering that many counters to the Goblinstein monster were melee troops, it meant that if you played a medium health melee troop inside the lightning link range, you would basically almost sacrifice your counter push if the opponent hit the ability. The ability could wreck fireballies as well as chip larger troops down. The Goblinstein was super versatile because it was amazing on defense and offense. When you would need to defend a big incoming push, you could have just dropped the monster same lane and play the ability and watch the opponent's push disintegrate. And if you wanted to attack, the monster did pretty decent damage, while also allowing for split lane pressure with the Doctor. And since the Doctor could survive basically any spell in the game except lightning, this 2 elixir ability was extremely threatening, since the ability only worked when the Doctor was alive. And when this card was first announced, the ability cooldown was 15 seconds, which actually meant that you could sometimes get more than 1 ability per cycle of the Goblinstein, which was wild. And to make things worse, 3-card cycle with this card was busted, since you would still have the 3-card cycle even if the monster died but the Doctor stayed alive. As I mentioned before, since the Doctor was unkillable without overspending, you could abuse this to outcycle your opponent, which is one of the main reasons why Goblinstein was used in some cycle decks like Mortar Bait and Hog Cycle. At the Goblinstein's peak, it recorded a 66% usage rate, with a 67% clean win rate, which meant that in every game that you had the Goblinstein and your opponent didn't, you would win 2 out of 3 matches rather than the normal 1 out of 2 that you would expect an average card to have, which is such an insane stat that it doesn't even address how insane a 66% usage rate is. The Goblinstein has to be one of the most broken cards this game has ever seen, and even despite the many nerfs it got in late 2024, it remained as one of the most used cards for months, showing how strong it really was when it was first released. The pre-release / June 2024 Goblin Curse. So originally, I planned to say June 2024 Goblin Curse, but I realized that the pre-release one was actually stronger, since Clash Royale nerfed it just before it was officially launched, and then they had to emergency nerf it 2 days after it got released. The difference between the pre-release and the official release Goblin Curse was that the pre-release one did more damage per tick. The extra damage that the pre-release one had meant that over its 6-second duration, the Goblin Curse would deal 258 damage to troops and 77 damage to crown towers. So it would do more damage to crown towers than the log, but slightly less total damage than the log, meaning that stuff like princesses would just barely survive. Considering that the actual release Goblin Curse was so overpowered, I doubt that this small stat nerf would affect much at all, since the damage amplification was the real issue, but it was still technically more strong, so I'm not clickbaiting. So even without its broken mechanic, it provided similar value to the log. But on top of that, the Goblin Curse would also turn any of the opponent's troops inside the radius into goblins, and also provide 50% damage amplification to your troops inside the radius, meaning that you could literally turn a mini P.E.K.K.A into a stronger version of a P.E.K.K.A for only 2 elixir. And the Goblin Curse also had the same radius as a graveyard at the time, meaning that a bigger push could be better dealt with. At its peak, the Goblin Curse had a 73% usage rate in Grand Challenges, making it one of the most used spells of all time up to that point. So it makes you wonder if its usage rate would have been closer to 80% if it kept its original pre-release stats. So to summarize, Supercell thought that a card that could do more crown tower damage than the log and the same normal damage as a barbarian barrel, give your troops 50% damage amplification, turn the opponent's troops into goblins, and also have a larger radius than the poison for only 2 elixir was balanced. I don't think there's much else to say about this card. It has to be one of the strongest spells this game has ever seen. The July/August 2016 Zap. The Zap spell is one of the most versatile spells in the game, but in its current state, it's not really OP. But in July and August of 2016, the Zap was a must-have in basically any kind of deck. At around that time, Clash Royale made it so that Zap could reset the Inferno Tower's beam, and stun the Elixir Collector's Elixir generation. This made Zap extremely unique, since nothing in the game at the time could do what the Zap could. This was also the version of Zap that could stun troops for 1 whole second, while also dealing enough damage to one-shot goblins. Zap was better than the log in every way imaginable, so it's no surprise that the Zap spell had a 98% usage rate in top 100 ladder, which literally meant that everyone was using it, and the 2% that weren't using it were probably just using a troll deck. There really isn't much else to say about the Zap, since it's such a simple card that was only broken because of its stats being too good for its cost, not because it had a broken ability. But I still think the July/August 2016 Zap deserves its spot as being one of the strongest spells of all time. The October 2021 Archer Queen. I was originally gonna rank the Archer Queen lower, since I didn't think it was as good as some of the other cards on this list, but I realized that the October 2021 Archer Queen was overpowered. not just because of her stats, but also because of how pay to win she was. To start, the Archer Queen had enough health to survive Fireball plus Log, but could be taken out by Lightning or Rocket, so Lightning was the best direct counter to the Archer Queen. The thing that made the Archer Queen broken was her ability, which allowed her to go invisible and deal 3 times the damage. For the 3.5 seconds that she went invisible, she could deal 675 damage per second, meaning that she could deal almost 2400 damage for only 1 elixir. To make things worse, on release, the ability cooldown was only 11 seconds, though this was emergency nerfed to 15 seconds within a week of release. The ability was basically a free positive elixir trade, since the opponent often needed to spend more than 1 elixir to defend it, otherwise she would deal thousands of damage on the tower, and on defense, the ability would crush things like balloons and P.E.K.K.A.s. So by the time the queen walked up to the bridge after defending a push, she would already have her ability back to use on offense, where again, the opponent would need to overspend, otherwise it would get way too much value. At her peak, the Archer Queen was used in over 60% of Grand Challenge decks for over 1 week until it got a proper nerf. Even Lightning was now the second most used card in the game, because that was the only way to deal with this obnoxious card. And to make things worse, at the time, outside of Grand and Classic challenges, champions were only available to players above King level 14. Level 14 was a strange time for Clash Royale, because of the scam of Clash Royale, but the bottom line is that few players had either enough resources or money to get level 14, and even fewer players were able to level up the Archer Queen on Trophy Road. So if you didn't open your wallet, you couldn't even use the Archer Queen to push trophies, so you had to sit back and watch as pay-to-win players destroyed you with the Archer Queen. It's for these reasons that I think the Archer Queen deserves to be one of the top 5 strongest cards of all time. The June 2017 Night Witch. I never thought I'd be making a video about broken cards where the Night Witch isn't in the top 3, but that just goes to show how crazy card releases have been, since the top 3 is entirely cards released in the last 2 to 3 years. But that doesn't mean the Night Witch wasn't a broken card on release. I know I've already mentioned this in my video of the worst metas, but I still think she was insane stats for the cost. For 1 whole elixir less than the Witch, she was capable of surviving a fireball and spawning bats every 5 seconds, which were stronger than they are today. Even though the Night Witch had crazy good health and stats, the bats was the thing that made her overpowered, since they basically doubled her damage per second. And when the Night Witch died, she would spawn 4 bats in a plus shape. This unique ability is what made her a legendary card, since she could still destroy pushes even after the troop died, and the fact that it spawned this way made it perfect at countering air units with splash attacks like the baby dragon. Another thing that also made the Night Witch amazing was the fact that she would instantly spawn bats when she was summoned, making her a get out of jail for free card for the defender. She was like a witch combined with a mini P.E.K.K.A., being able to destroy both air and ground cards, and for this reason, she was extremely versatile. At her peak, she recorded a 41% usage rate in top 200 ladder, making her the second most used troop in the game at the time, with the Goblins being the highest, probably because the Goblins could counter her pretty well. Considering how rare legendaries were at the time, 41% usage rate is actually insanely high. I think what also made the Night Witch annoying was the fact that she was kind of a low skill card because of her simple mechanic, meaning that she was easy to farm wins with. And this can be shown in the fact that the top decks at the time were literally all Night Witch beatdown decks. This easily cements the Night Witch as one of the strongest cards in Clash Royale history. The November 2023 Little Prince. I think it's crazy that a lot of the cards I've talked about so far have been released in the last 3 years, since you would expect that Clash Royale would have experience in balancing cards and playtesting. But once again, the November 2023 Little Prince was another terribly unbalanced card release. Starting with the troop itself, he was able to survive a fireball, which in itself is a little concerning since it was a negative elixir trade to instantly kill the card, enabling him to survive for as long as possible, and allowing the user to abuse the 3-card cycle. On top of that, his charge up speed was incredibly fast. After hitting a troop only 5 times, his DPS would already be at 275 at level 11, making him deal over 26% more damage per second than a musketeer. At the time, the Little Prince's final stage DPS was only 20% less than the Archer Queen ability, and this didn't cost any extra elixir either. This insane damage made the Little Prince a nightmare to deal with, since he would charge up super fast and also destroy any kind of push that came towards him. And then we get to the ability. For only 3 elixir, you would be able able to spawn basically a knight that would protect the Little Prince, which seems balanced at first. But the thing that made the ability insanely overpowered was its high damage and extremely far knockback, combined with its far charge distance. The damage output was already so outrageous, since it could destroy cards that were placed on top of the Little Prince, but also the knockback was capable of pushing big cards extremely far back, to the point that you would question, why would a charging knight have the ability to push a literal giant that far back? And at the time, if you played the ability when the Little Prince connected to the tower, the Guardian would instantly connect to the tower. But it still gets worse. The reason that I called the Little Prince an unbalanced card release wasn't just because he was a strong card, but because he had glitches and exploits that made him even more annoying to deal with. The first glitch was that the Little Prince could spawn 2 Guardians if you cloned him and hit the ability at the same time. Even though this was a pretty broken glitch, it wasn't something that you would exploit, it was just kind of funny. But the second glitch, which happened after a set of balance changes, was basically a buff, which is crazy because this card was already a strong card. So Clash Royale accidentally buffed the Little Prince despite him being so strong. What would happen is that after the Little Prince charged up once, he would maintain that charge even if he stopped attacking, and attacked again. This meant that every time the Little Prince attacked, he would instantly charge back up to full damage. This was not meant to happen, since the whole point of the Little Prince is that his charged attack restarts when he starts moving again. So you would basically get a moving Archer Queen ability with this glitch. Luckily, Supercell did get onto this pretty fast, but it wasn't a good look that this glitch even happened in the first place. Since the Little Prince was given out for free, you would basically see him anywhere if you played above 5k trophies. In Grand Challenges, the Little Prince recorded an 84% usage rate, and even in the top 10 decks of November 2023, the Little Prince was in 8 of them. I think this cements the Little Prince easily as one of the top 3 most overpowered cards of all time. The October/November 2022 Phoenix. The Phoenix is a nice concept on paper, and I think it really does deserve to have the legendary rarity, but I can't help but feel like the October/November 2022 Phoenix was purposely made to be broken by Clash Royale. For only 1 more elixir than a Mega Minion, you got an extremely fast attacking troop dealing 38% more damage per second, with the same melee attack distance, as well as having 45% more health, enabling it to survive lightning while the Mega Minion couldn't. And considering that the Phoenix didn't do splash damage, having a fast hit speed is actually preferred, since it means it can kind of deal with swarm cards like bats. And I haven't even talked about its respawn ability. When the Phoenix was destroyed, it spawned an egg that at the time could survive the log and could potentially respawn if it died too far away from the tower, or even if a single arrow from the Princess Tower was tanked for by something else.
This could be skeletons, it could be Ice Spear, it could be anything. It just needs to tank 1 arrow from the Princess Tower to survive the egg rebirth.
Which is absurd, since basically anything in the game can tank a Princess Tower hit. And something that I realized recently is that the Phoenix egg could respawn even if it was inside a poison. On top of that, if you zapped the tower, the Phoenix would always respawn. And now I've run out of words to say about how broken this card was. And to make things even worse, on death, the Phoenix also dealt death damage that could kill swarm cards as well as knockback cards further than the log can. And the respawned Phoenix was identical to an alive Phoenix. So basically for 4 elixir, you could basically almost always get 2 whole Phoenixes. That was basically almost 50% better than a literal Mega Minion. So theoretically, the Phoenix could get around 8 elixir of value if you played your cards correctly, which is honestly disgusting, since it meant that cheap Phoenix cycle became a viable strategy. And if you could keep your opponent in limbo trying to defend your pushes, you could overwhelm them with Phoenixes. And that's exactly how this card was mostly played even in competitive play. In Grand Challenges, the Phoenix recorded over an 80% usage rate. Cards like Elixir Pump, Rage, and Mirror were also sitting above what they normally sit at, indicating they were purely used to boost how OP the Phoenix already was. The Phoenix is easily one of the strongest cards this game has ever seen, and I don't know whether or not I should be concerned that the Phoenix isn't even the strongest card of all time. There are some cards that I wanted to talk about in this video that deserve to be mentioned, so maybe I'll make a part 2 of this video where I talk about the following cards, but for now, I'll just mention them here. The May 2016 Royal Giant. The pre-release Royal Recruits. The January 2018 Royal Ghost. The May/June 2024 Void. The December 2016 Elite Barbarians. The entirety of the 2016 Elixir Collector. The October 2016 Poison. The October 2019 Elixir Golem. The April 2025 Boss Bandit. The June 2024 Goblin Machine. The June 2024 Goblin Machine was so strong that I genuinely think it's better than some super cards that Clash Royale has released in its temporary game modes, and that isn't even a joke. I remember playing classic challenges at the time because I wanted to farm wins using the broken card, but so many people had better spam decks that it just became a game of spam the broken card and wait for it to take the tower. The Goblin Machine had an extremely fast attack speed, which made his melee damage per second absurd, while also making him decent at countering swarm cards, but that wasn't why the Goblin Machine was used. His rocket at level 15 was capable of dealing 855 splash damage, and no, I did not forget its crown tower damage stat, because it didn't have one. That's right, the Goblin Machine did the same damage to crown towers as to normal troops, which is insane that this was overlooked by the balancing team. Each rocket was like a giant skeleton bomb, so the fact that a card that is cheaper than the giant skeleton and dealt more damage while dropping basically giant skeleton bombs every 3.5 seconds was insane. And keep in mind, this was also the time that the Goblin Curse was in one of its strongest states as a card, providing 50% damage amplification and having a larger radius. So theoretically, these rockets could have dealt almost 1300 damage every 3.5 seconds. So not only did the Goblin Curse make your cycle faster, it could literally clear out swarms and boost the damage of the Goblin Machine. The fact that in Grand Challenges, decks with the highest win rate were Goblin Machine mirror spam decks was wild. The Goblin Machine recorded an 83% usage rate on its very first day in Grand Challenges, making it the most used troop in Clash Royale history. To make things worse, Mirror recorded a 73% usage rate, which meant that basically every match that the Goblin Machine was played in, Mirror was also played. The Goblin Machine's clean win rate was 73%, which meant that in games that you had the Goblin Machine and your opponent didn't, you would win basically 3 out of every 4 games, which theoretically means that you could win a grand challenge by just being an average player, just because you had the OP card and your opponent didn't. The top 8 cards in grand challenges made up the most popular decks at the time, and for the first time in that year, P.E.K.K.A had a high usage rate, simply because P.E.K.K.A and Evo Skeletons were the best response to the Goblin Machine. Watching any kind of gameplay of this OP Goblin Machine is so cursed, since it's literally just spam and win, and since at the time many opponents wouldn't really know what the card's mechanic was, combined with the fact that you would often have to overcommit to take him out, makes the Goblin Machine a menace. The Goblin Machine got an emergency nerf only 1 day after it got released, which sort of tanked his usage rate, but nothing can ever replicate how broken this card was on its very first day. Easily the most strongest card in the game's history, and I would argue it was more broken than the Phoenix. I hope you enjoyed this video though. Thanks for watching.